Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our special Hurricane Watch, the Path to Preparedness. We have a great group of meteorologists here, but first I would like to ask you if you would please share this link. Also, get your friends and family, check this special out. It is about saving lives and educating everyone, not only in Connecticut, but also Rhode Island. Of course, I'm News 8's Chief Meteorologist Gil Simmons with Co-Chief right here, Joe Fury.
Hi, everybody.
We are proud to be partnered up with WPRI, our sister station, who sent a couple of brothers here with us. We have our chief meteorologist, Tony Petracca, who I've known for many years here.
Yep.
And meteorologist TJ DeSanto. Great to see you gentlemen here. And this is exciting. We're teaming up together for a very important day today. And thanks for the nice sunny welcome now, too, to Rhode Island.
It actually took 4 meteorologists to get the sun shining on what has been an otherwise miserable spring.
Right, exactly.
But, I mean, how lucky are we, on this East Coast tour to have Southern New England as one of the spots here at, this is the first spot on the East Coast tour at Quonset State Airport in North Kingstown. And the backbone of this whole tour is public awareness and public education. How powerful both of those items are less than 3 weeks to the start of the hurricane season.
And we have a number of federal agencies here, local agencies, state agencies here to give tours of these planes, and a number of school children here as well, very interested in these Hurricane Hunter aircraft, which are just fantastic pieces of machinery.
And of course, the best National Weather Service office in the entire country right here. Our Boston guys are here. We love them, and we thank them for everything they do. But, it's hard to believe that, 81 years ago, the Hurricane of 38 came up here, and we didn't know it was coming. So look where we've come since then, and what we're doing now is phenomenal. We've been talking between us about what do people have to do. I mean, some people just don't realize, the magnitude of what could happen someday.
I think with recent memories, too, of Irene and Sandy, which I know that was a little more of a Connecticut influence, but, of course, a lot of our viewers still recall all the impact. And those were low-end tropical storms, some of the gusts 70, 75 miles per hour. But we cringe at what history has done to us in the past. When you look at the 50s, when you had multiple tropical systems coming up, and then of course 1938, that's kind of the benchmark, not only a Connecticut impact but also Rhode Island all the way to Providence.
And not to take anything away from Sandy, Bob, and Gloria, but the last major hurricane to strike this area, we were talking about it, 1954 Carol. A whole generation of Southern New Englanders have not seen a major Category 3 hurricane. All the more reason why we're here to educate the public.
And I'm glad you bring up Gloria, too. That was Category 1, low tide, not a lot of rain. But, growing up, we remember that was a big impact to our local area.
Yep.
Very strong winds and a lot of rainfall for some folks, but it's going to happen again. It's just a matter of when. We don't know when, but it will happen again.
Very important to be prepared. That's one of the goals. And of course, we're also excited too because of what's going on behind us, these airplanes. A lot of what we do comes from data that they gather. Very, very important part of hurricane season.
It's a flying laboratory.
Exactly.
When we talk about the storms on television, here's the latest position, the longitude, the strength, the movement. That data comes from these aircraft immediately into our weather centers and then immediately to your TV set at home. So these aircraft, these scientists, vital as far as getting accurate information out.
Well, what do you say we take a look at what's going on with these airplanes? Can we?
Can we?
Let's head out to Ashley Baylor. She is in the Hurricane Hunter behind us here. Ashley, show us.
I know. I'm actually in the cockpit of the WC-130 reconnaissance plane, and I'm with two really what I think are extraordinary gentlemen. We have meteorologist Warren Madden right here, who actually works down at the National Hurricane Center, and I also have Lieutenant Colonel Ivan DeRoche here as well, and both have actually been on this plane, flying in it before. And now, Warren, you don't fly in them anymore, but you did at one point. So what do you do now?
Well, now I work at the National Hurricane Center. I'm still employed by the Air Force as a civilian employee. I'm a retired lieutenant colonel, and I am a part of the unit that coordinates all of the reconnaissance flights. So I work directly with the forecast forecasters at the National Hurricane Center to determine what their needs are for sending aircraft out into the storms. And then I work with both squadrons, the Air Force's squadron and NOAA's squadron, to get the planes where they need to be, when they need to be. And as all that data is flowing from the aircraft back to us in the National Hurricane Center, I'm doing quality control on it, providing it to the forecasters, and then it goes out to the rest of the world so you can provide that information to the public.
Yeah, so we rely on you a ton. Now, Lieutenant Colonel, this obviously looks amazingly complicated. So tell us exactly what all of this is here.
This is the flight deck of the WC-130J. It's the most modern C-130 in the Air Force fleet, but it's actually 20 years old. We have standard flight controls like any aircraft. Most of our instrumentation is put on these panels in a kind of like a TV screen, electronic format. And then all the navigation happens in these instruments here, and it's the throttles. That's our gas pedal right here.
Okay, and so now what happens as you are actually approaching one of the storms? And not necessarily hurricanes, sometimes they're just tropical storms, tropical depressions. So take us through what happens when you deploy out.
Okay, so our typical mission is 8 to 10 hours. Sometimes they exceed 12. My longest is about 13 and a half. The typical day is 2 hours before takeoff, and then you get en route, and then you're in the storm an hour or two later. And then we spend about 5 to 6 hours inside the storm environment, continually crisscrossing the storm through the center. Okay. And as you approach the center, you get more and more turbulence, and then every storm has a name because they all have their own personality. So how much turbulence and what's the rides like, we'll tell you after.
Right, and that's a good way to put it, is that every storm gets a name because they do have their personalities. So I think everybody wants to know, is it really a Category 5 storm that is the toughest to fly through, or is it maybe something else?
I think, personally, the developing tropical storm, when we're down lower in the boundary layers around 2,500 feet, that you get typically the worst ride. Yeah. Now, that's not to say that any landfalling hurricane, because it's interacting with the landmass, it's going to be a bumpy ride.
Yeah, and you were saying that as well, Warren, that the worst you ever flew through was a...
Yeah, the worst I was in was a tropical storm that was trying to become a hurricane as it approached the west coast of Florida, just north of Tampa, and it was a very rough ride. You know, we ran into an area of thunderstorms where the aircraft was shaking so violently for a good 30 seconds that my eyeballs could not keep up with my instruments. I could not focus on my instruments for that 30 seconds, and it was a rough one.
I mean, that's just incredible. Well, thank you so much, gentlemen. We're actually going to make our way over to the next plane, the P3, and we're going to take a look at that in just a little bit.
Wonderful. Well, we certainly appreciate that insight. That is awesome. And I have the honor, Joe, this is an honor to be here with the head of the Hurricane Center. On your right, to my left, Mr. Kenneth Grahame. And, sir, first of all, I want to shake your hand and thank you for your time here today.
Oh,
absolutely. Thanks for being here, sir. Wonderful to have you.
This is I know you go through a tremendous amount of responsibility year-round, not just during hurricane season. We're doing this to elevate safety to the community. Now, what things would you like to pass along to the viewers here who are checked in today?
You know, we were talking about, before we went back on the air here, we were having a great conversation over here about the dangers that we have. It's been a long time since we've been hit. So if you think about it, it's been a long time. That doesn't mean it can't happen.
That's right.
Right? It's such an important factor because we have to talk about what could happen rather than what did happen in the past. Do you know we perceive our risk based on our past experience? Right. And that could be dangerous. We got to be careful with that.
You do.
Talk about hurricane, wind. Everybody's like, what's the wind? What's the wind speed? What's the category? But what about the water? What do we find that happens in these storms to folks in terms of being inundated with the flooding and the loss of life?
Yeah, if you think about it, the category is just the wind.
Sure.
So the real danger here is in the data. Let's examine the data. So if you think about it, 90% of fatalities in tropical systems comes from the water.
Wow.
In the last 3 years, 83% of those fatalities have been inland flooding and the dangers of that. Over half, by the way, in vehicles. So the data's there. The data is absolutely there. Water is what we got to talk about.
Okay, let's talk about water. Florence. Can you tell us something about what happened with Florence as far as the water?
Yeah, with Florence, I mean, you think about all the different hazards with Florence. It's interesting to look at. There were 22 fatalities in Florence. It's a terrible tragedy. 17 of those were in flooding, inland flooding. Wow. By the way, 16 were in vehicles out of that 17. So
Right.
that's just the data. It's the dangers of water. You think about it, it's been a long time, and it's not just a coastal event, right? It could be hundreds of miles inland. And we did talk about that offline, right? We talked about the highest storm surge in Florence was 100 miles inland. So that's something that we always
And I
gotta
know
think
we've
about.
had events here in New England where you get a landfall, whether it's Long Island or coastal New England, and yet that threat goes inland for the amount of rain, which will raise the rivers, especially something that stalls out. And I know you've seen that in the past as well.
Yeah, the slow is our nemesis, right? Slow and large is our nemesis. A slow storm, you put more rain. There's more time to pile the water into every little river. You think about a river, that's supposed to drain your water, right?
Right.
But if that storm sits, it pushes that water up that river. So places that don't normally flood will flood. And think about this. When the storm is pushing that storm surge in, the water's high, and then you put the rain on top of it, that water can't drain.
Right.
So if you think about it, the water just keeps piling up and piling up. The longer the storm's there, the more water we
Now,
get.
I feel like we could talk to you probably for an hour, but we'd be putting in, filling out an application to work with you because we would be out of work.
We always need great folks, though. We always need great folks.
I do want you to look in there, though. What are the points? What's a point you want to leave with everyone who is watching in New England that you can get across?
Yeah, one of the big running themes here has been talking about it's been a long time since we've been hit. Let me tell you, it's very important. That could be real dangerous. So think about this. You got to plan every single year for what could happen. What could happen, not necessarily your past experience. You got to be ready every single year as if you're going to be hit. Simple as that.
All
Like
right.
you said, make a
we
plan.
appreciate your time.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. Keep up
Ken,
the great
thank you,
work.
sir.
And along those lines about preparedness, let's hear from meteorologist Sam Cantrell.
The days before a storm can only be described as complete chaos. Scrambling to get supplies, grocery stores empty, just complete mayhem. And with hurricane season right around the corner, it's important to make sure that you're prepared, and the time to start doing that is right now. It's only a matter of time before the next tropical system comes to New England. We saw 2 in a row with Irene and Sandy, so having a kit ready to go just in case is extremely important.
If there's an emergency and you have to grab your kit and maybe leave your home, you don't want to be scrambling for the supplies. You want to have them in one spot. So you want to have the water, the food, your first aid kit, your radio, all in one spot. We recommend putting it in a Tupperware container, keeping it somewhere cool that's not damp, and then you could just take it and leave.
So what should this kit contain? There are 5 important things that you need.
The first one would be water for drinking and sanitation reasons. The second one would be a food supply. The third one would be a means to stay informed, so a radio, having a way to get lighting, and then having your medications that you need. If you take medications daily, making sure you have those on site as well.
After your kit is ready, have a plan for your family just in case you need to evacuate to a safe meeting place in the event of an emergency. Finally, don't forget to stay in tune with the latest forecast so you can be informed in case bad weather strikes. And don't forget, it's not a matter of if, but when the next Sandy or Irene will come to New England. I'm meteorologist Sam Cantrell, News 8.
All right, we are joined by acting FEMA Administrator Peter Gaynor. For folks in Rhode Island, you might look familiar.
Local boy.
That's right. Providence Emergency Management Agency Director, went on to the state level. How has that transition been from Providence to state to the federal level?
It's breathtaking. FEMA has a wide responsibility. Disasters of every type. There's not a day that goes by that something isn't going on in the United States, so a lot of responsibility. But I have great people working for me.
Talk about we were talking earlier off camera about the pre-disaster preparations as far as acting before storms even arrive.
So Congress this past October passed the Disaster Recovery Relief Act, DRRA, and in that is a provision that allows us to set aside 6% of all disaster dollars for pre-disaster mitigation. So instead of paying for the disaster after the disaster, let's pay a larger amount of money in pre-disaster mitigation. So it will be available October of 2020, and we're going to put probably 10 or 12 times the money we're putting today. So $50 million today in our current pre-disaster mitigation fund. Come October, anywhere between $300 and $500 million in pre-disaster mitigation. So we want to change the dynamic of let's do something before disaster instead of after disaster.
Hurricanes are still one of the major natural disasters that the United States has to deal with. We've had quite a few in just the past few years.
Hurricane, flooding, tornadoes. Again, we want to make an investment before disaster strikes.
We have a very unique geography here in southern New England between rivers, Narragansett Bay, Buzzards Bay, a storm surge. What do you tell people around here, especially the younger generation who have yet to see a major hurricane? Know your flood zone, for instance.
So you got to know your risk, right? So where do you live? And what is that risk to you and your family or your business? There's lots of tools that you can go on the Rhode Island EMA and look at the floodplain tool, and you can put your address in and see what risk you're at. And if you don't understand your risk, then I'm not sure how you can actually prepare. Exactly. So first things first, understand your risk. And then if you're at risk of flooding, get flood insurance. It will pay in dividends should you have a flooding event. And, 1 inch of water is $25,000 in damage. Whoa. So, again, it's just smart business to invest in a flood insurance policy.
So it's just flooding that we have to worry about. It's also wind, right, Tony?
You talk about, you want to educate the public about the impacts, not just flooding from the ocean, but you just mentioned, freshwater flooding from rivers and things like that, knowing what the power of the wind, what it can do, whether it's a Category 1, a Category 2, a tropical storm. So I was able to go to the Naval Undersea Warfare Center in Newport to kind of better understand the power of hurricane-force winds. It was a learning experience. Take a look. Our anemometer is recording a sustained wind now at 40 miles per hour. At this kind of wind speed, we start to see failure of at least small tree limbs and possibly some power lines.
Tropical storm winds range from 39 to 73 miles per hour. And here's a look at 60 mile per hour winds.
This is now a moderate tropical storm. Of course, the wind speeds like this, you need the eyewear to protect your eyes from drying out. These kind of winds would normally bring down tree limbs and power lines.
On the Saffir-Simpson scale, a Category 1 hurricane has winds between 74 and 95 miles per hour. At 74 miles per hour, the flesh on your face starts to ripple. Not very attractive. At 96 miles per hour, we cross over into Category 2 strength. Damage becomes moderate with ocean surges of 6 to 8 feet.
Even at speeds like this, I'm still able to stand, but it's rather difficult. Examples of Category 2 hurricanes would be Hurricane Bob and Hurricane Gloria. And yes, it proves it's my real hair.
Winds over 110 miles per hour are considered major hurricanes, Category 3. Hurricane Carol was the last Category 3 to hit southern New England 46 years ago.
We have sustained winds at 111 miles per hour. This is now a Category 3 hurricane. At this point, wind damage would be extensive, and out over the ocean, we'd be dealing with a storm surge on the water of 12 feet. It is almost impossible to keep a straight posture.
Meanwhile, in the wind tunnel control room, the airspeed is brought back down.
All right, hi, everybody. All right.
Yes.
We are so excited to be here today. This is just a fantastic, wonderful day. The sun is out, and the hurricane hunters are here. And with us now is the meteorologist in charge of the National Weather Service, Boston, Massachusetts, Mr. Andy Nash. Andy, thanks for being with us here today.
Thank you.
Welcome.
And Andy, you are born and raised in Connecticut.
I am. I was born and raised in Canton, Connecticut.
How about
there you
that?
go.
Yeah.
So you know the area. You know the struggles we're up against with forecasting.
I do. Yes. Yeah. It's it's always a challenge, and when it comes to hurricanes, that's even more of a challenge with all the the hills in Connecticut, the rivers, the coastline, lots of different things.
I want to ask you, too, when we talked to, of course, the head of the Hurricane Center was just here. How is it with the communication between our local National Weather Service office and what the Hurricane Center is forecasting? And how do you smooth that over and bring that to us and then our residents?
Well, I mean, we're working with them during the off season and not just during hurricanes.
Okay.
So we got a good working relationship with Ken Grahame and all of his crew down there in Miami. And so when it comes to the situation where a hurricane is, say, coming for Connecticut, we're on the phone with them. We're doing conference calls. They're doing the big general hurricane forecast.
Right.
It's our job to work with the communities, the local emergency management, and work with you folks in the media to get that word out for what does this really mean
local
for
impacts,
for Naugatuck, for Bridgeport, for Hartford.
Exactly. But how do you, when you in your office, how many employees do you have in the office? And when you're talking about a hurricane coming, you've got the coast of Massachusetts, you've got the inland area. How do you coordinate all that within your own office?
It's difficult, but we train for this, during the off season. So we're always kind of thinking hurricanes. So when it comes into the hurricane season, we've already kind of done simulated hurricanes already up to that point. So that's what we go with. We go with what we're trained to do.
And it seems like a theme talking to people even here off of our program. Flooding is something that gets overlooked. Expand that a little bit with our viewers.
Yeah, well, you think of a hurricane, you might think the winds. And that's where you get the really cool video of roofs blowing off. Well, not that that's a good thing, but it's action-packed.
That's what people relate to.
That's what they think of. But it's the flooding, the river flooding and the storm surge along the coast that really is what kills the majority of people. And especially inland, people are just not thinking, boy, this stream that's by my house, boy, it's going to turn into a raging river. Things that are going to happen with a hurricane, we may see once every 100 years.
Right.
So it's out of our collective consciousness what could happen.
And you can get some of these systems that even slow down as they move inland.
It's even more dangerous.
Now you're talking about double-digit rainfall amounts. So someone watching from Hartford could be just as much of a flood-prone setup to someone, as you mentioned, Bridgeport or New Haven or New London.
Yeah.
It could be a statewide issue.
Right. And growing up in Canton, the storm of history of record there is the 1955 floods from tropical systems.
Yes.
So tell us what people can do. We got Hurricane Preparedness Week. So what are the things that we go through this week that we should be doing to prepare us for what's coming?
And this is the time to prepare before hurricane season. Figure out, are you in an evacuation zone? Do you live near a river or a stream that could flood? If you are going to have to evacuate, to where? Is your, how far inland are you going to have to move? Do you have friends or family you can go to? You need to work that all out now so that when a hurricane is approaching, you're not thinking about what to do. You just go and do it.
Get it figured out now.
Yes.
And when it comes, you're all set.
Right. And because, as we have talked about before, the magnitude of the storms that we've seen over the course of the last many years is nothing compared to what it could be someday.
Right. And when we get a major hurricane, with the wind, widespread power outages for weeks. Make sure that you're prepared for that. Maybe your house is okay, but you've got no power. So, what are you going to eat and all that?
And we all cringe if, God forbid, a 1938 ever played out.
It's going to happen.
Yes.
It's going to happen again.
I want to thank you for your time, though, and what you're doing to educate our viewers and, of course, the public, get that safety point out there.
Absolutely.
Flooding is a big deal, too.
Yes.
Andy, thank you, sir.
All right. Thank you, Joe. Thank you.
All right. Now we're going to continue our tour. Let's go to meteorologist Ashley Baylor for the latest now.
Well, I'm actually standing in front of the P3 plane, and I'm happen to be with Commander Nate Kahn, commander of this awesome plane right here. So tell us about the P3.
So the WP3 Orion, the plane behind us, is an aircraft designed for hurricane reconnaissance and research. We use that airplane to fly directly into the center of the storm through the eye walls to gather data to improve both the forecast for track and intensity.
And I hear with going through all the hurricanes, this one earns a new paint job every year.
I'm not going to lie. I've been responsible for new paint jobs just about every time I take the airplane into a storm. So several times a year.
Yes. And so now how is this one different than the C-130?
So the C-130, the U.S. Air Force, our partner in the mission, they do they have a lot more aircraft and they can cover a lot larger area, but we do a lot more specific research. Our aircraft is consistently refitted with new scientific instruments. We work with the Hurricane Research Division to gather new and developing data and tech that we can keep on the aircraft and fly consistently. So we have fewer airplanes, but we can gather a significantly larger spread of data and test new equipment to gather new information for new experiments.
It's so fascinating how they really work. They coincide with each other, but this one's certainly more science-based. Now, how long have you been flying with the P3?
So I joined NOAA in 2015. Prior to that, I flew for the U.S. Navy for 12 years, and I've been flying P3s my entire career. So I'm going on 17 years of flying the P3.
Any particularly memorable storm?
Well, I've been in every major hurricane except for Joaquin since the 2015 season. Lane last year out in Hawaii was my first Hawaiian storm. That was a really, really kind of gnarly one. Michael last year was brutal. The whole season in 17 was nasty with Irma and Maria. All of those storms were very mean. Going back a year before that, Matthew was the storm of the year. That was a really nasty one. And then, they all have their own memories, but kind of every year there's one that stands out.
Yeah, I will say actually when I was at our sister station at Wavy, oh yeah, Matthew definitely brings up a few memories. Thank you so much, Commander, for telling us about the P3. And now I'm going to send it back over to Tony and TJ.
All right, we are joined by Dave Valley. He is head of the Northeast River Forecast Center. And we've got 3 Lyndon State College graduates here. Big weather school up there in Vermont, and all 3 of us went there.
We've known Dave for many, many years. He is a walking encyclopedia when it comes to New England hurricanes.
Dave, tell us a little bit about your job as head of the River Forecast Center.
So for a River Forecast Center, we have the duties of forecasting what comes out of the sky. And then the hydrologic part is figuring out what all that water is going to do when it hits the ground, to forecast the rivers and streams, their elevations, the amount of flow. And for hurricanes, as we saw in Irene, it can be all about the rain, or like we saw in Sandy, it can all be about my ability to forecast that storm surge up the rivers and streams in the region.
So there's the misconception maybe with the public when they're approaching hurricane is that if I'm not near the bay or the ocean, I don't have a flood concern, and nothing could be further from the truth. The inland freshwater flooding is the concern.
In fact, by today's standards, that's where many of the deaths are occurring.
Away from the ocean,
Away from the ocean. It's not the storm surge, it's the fresh water. Just look at New England, Rhode Island, and Connecticut. One of the worst events in our history from a river flood standpoint was Hurricane Diane, 1955. Which dumped 18.15 inches of rain in one day over the town of Westfield, Massachusetts. Catastrophic flooding. It put down a foot of rain over the Blackstone Valley, which did a number on the city of Woonsocket at that time. I mean, absolutely devastated that community.
So rivers like the Blackstone, the Patuxent, and even some of the smaller rivers, how aggravated they can get, even in a minimal hurricane that maybe slows down and dumps a tremendous amount of rain.
Yeah, and we've had that happen historically, where you get a slower mover, and it's typically the slower movers that are going to be the ones to produce the most rainfall. But even storms like Carol or 1938 that were moving at 40, 50 miles an hour still dumped anywhere from 6 to 8 inches of rain over us.
Dave, what's the worst case scenario from your standpoint as far as freshwater flooding?
Oh,
for us here in New England.
For us here in New England, I think clearly it's a storm system that's going to make landfall over Cape Cod, so that we're not so focused on the storm surge. Put Irene going up Buzzards Bay would have put that 10 to 15 inches of rain down over Rhode Island and in nearby Massachusetts. That would have been our worst case river flood scenario. But we've got a couple of rivers like the Pawcatuck and the Patuxent where we can drive an 8 or 10 foot storm surge back up those rivers for miles. And people, I think, don't realize that there's that kind of potential, even on the Patuxent, way up the bay, that we could drive a 10-foot storm surge all the way back to the Pontiac Mill.
And it doesn't have to be a hurricane. It can be a remnant moisture from a storm. It can be a tropical storm or even a tropical depression, so not necessarily a hurricane.
No, that's correct. All we really need is the circulation tapping that deep tropical plume of moisture. You get that right combination and it's a slow mover, you're going to have an awful lot of rainfall. And we've seen it happen in June. We've seen it happen in late October like we did in 2005, where we had 3 systems that had tropical remnant with them and put down over 1.5 feet of rain over parts of central Massachusetts. And that produced very severe flooding down the Blackstone Valley.
All right, what can people do to prepare for that kind of flooding?
I think the first thing is know thy enemy. You've got to understand where you are in the floodplain. Realize the history. If you've had flooding before from lesser storms, understand what it's going to take. You want to make sure you can get everything of critical nature out of the basement, out of the low level. If you're in a floodplain, know where your shelters are. Treat it like the coastal residents do. People who are going to need to evacuate know where those shelters are. They utilize the evacuation maps to their advantage. We need to take the same approach on the rivers and streams. And many times you're not going to be able to see the river that's going to put the water on your property. So just prepare ahead of time. Know what you're going to do and have a plan to do it.
All right, Dave, thanks for the great work that you guys do over at the National Weather Service in Taunton, and especially in the River Division, and all the important information that you're giving out every day. We appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much. Good to be with you guys.
All right, and if you're just tuning in, there is time for the public to come down to Quonset Point in North Kingstown. This Hurricane Awareness Tour is open from 2 to 5 o'clock. You see that aircraft? You can walk in that aircraft. You can go in the cockpit. You can see all the instrumentation on that plane. In fact, TJ and I were lucky enough to go on the cockpit just a little while ago, TJ.
That one that you see in the foreground, that Air Force Hurricane Hunter, Really cool plane, and you can walk in the belly of it too, where they keep all the equipment and they drop what we call the drop sounds down into the middle of the hurricanes. Really cool and interesting aircraft for you to see, and there's that NOAA aircraft in the background.
And another reason to come out here today is the sun is shining.
Hey, nice. It's like you guys have control in Rhode Island here. It's everything I've heard.
We wave a powerful stick.
I guess so. But I want to say, it's nice for us to be able to team up with sister stations and all on the mission of educating people and to hope, of course, we can all hope we'll never deal, but the reality is the sands of time are going through the hourglass. I mean, one of these hurricane seasons will really test people here in New England.
And we hope that if the Hurricane of 38 comes along again, that this today has put you on the path to preparedness, and hopefully you'll be ready.
And this special, which obviously had a lot of great information, will live on our websites even throughout the hurricane season. So your website, our website, you can catch this half-hour special all throughout hurricane season and watch it again.
Awesome.
Yep.
Well, I want to thank everyone involved. Of course, we have a full crew behind the camera, too, here that we have to give a shout-out. We want to give Ashley a shout-out, too, for the show and tell in those awesome airplanes as well. And we want to remind you, download the WPRI app. Or
the WTNH app.
There you go. Awesome. High five, too. Great job. It was great working with you guys. Joe, great job. And be safe. Now is the time to prepare. Thank you all very much.